This is John Doxey, and I am sitting with Rita Pisciotta in her home at 2048 Stockton Street in San Francisco's North Beach District. This is our interview for the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Oral History Program. So, Rita, I think it would be nice if we started off today talking about growing up in this neighborhood. This is the very house in which you grew up, is that right?
Yes. I would like to talk about it.
Okay, and so maybe if you could tell me the year you were born, and were you actually born in this house, or were you born in a hospital? And this is the home where your parents were already living, right?
I was born in 1942, May of 1942. My parents were living in this house. I was born in St. Francis Hospital here in San Francisco. I grew up in this house with 3 siblings. And when I was, I think, around 12 years old, my father built the house next door, and the family moved next door, and we rented this flat.
Was this home predated your parents, though? This is...
Oh, absolutely. This house was built in just after the earthquake in 1908, after the 1906 earthquake. So it's over 100 years old, and it's doing very well. It has been through several earthquakes, not the 06 one, of course.
Was it built by Italian craftsmen, do you think?
I don't think so, because I have some of the old records from the city, and they were not initially. I don't think they were Italian. I can't be sure. I can't find those records. I'm gonna have to go back to the archives in the city and find out. But initially, from what I can understand, I think this was initially just 2 stories. Right now, it's a 3-story building, and initially it was 2 stories, and then they added. I think they added this floor, which is the top floor, because the wainscoting and the wood design is a little different than the downstairs. So I think the downstairs might be the older section, and this was added later. I don't know exactly when.
And your parents came from Calabria, right?
That's right.
Was it 1933?
They came to San Francisco in 1933. My mother was actually born in New York, in the Bronx, because at that time, the turn of the century, my grandparents on both sides came to America. My maternal grandmother and grandfather came to New York, and that's where my mother was born. When she was 5, they returned to Italy, because by that time, they were considered quite wealthy. They were able to return to the village and build a very nice house. And so she was actually 5 when she went back. My paternal grandparents came to San Francisco because there were many, many relatives and friends who had moved to this district, lived on Telegraph Hill. So my father's father and mother came here the turn of the century, and they were here for the earthquake in San Francisco. And my grandmother was terrified by the earthquake. You know, they had to move off the hill. I think they were probably living in tents in the park. She said, "Get me out of here. I'm going to go back to Italy. Don't ever, I'm not coming back."
There's no earthquakes in Italy, after all.
Oh, yeah, right. Southern Italy, yeah, there's a few. So my grandfather said, "Okay, if you go back to Italy, you're never coming back here. I will not bring you back." And he did not. He came back, but she never came back. And he returned, and so my father was actually born in Italy. And his father returned to San Francisco and never returned to Italy until my father was 16. So he was here for about 15 years while my father was growing up.
What was the town where your mother and father...
It's called San Sosti, S-A-N-S-O-S-T-I, San Sosti. It's in the mountains. As crow flies, it's probably only 20 miles, but it's a long, hour's drive from the coast because it's a windy, windy road. And I did live there in Italy for a while.
What's the main industry? What did your family do, your ancestors?
Agriculture. Although it is in the mountains, so I mean they didn't have, land with wheat or anything like that. It was mostly fruit, fig trees, and fruit trees, and big vegetable gardens.
And they would take their produce and sell it in a larger city, or
No, I mean
just for local consumption.
It was for local. That was my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family had what's called a contadina, a little a bodega, where my grandmother sold wine and I guess salami. And they all had animals, because they all made their own cheese.
So we're jumping ahead a little bit. We're going to talk about the garden that your parents had in San Francisco, but do you think this is where they developed that sort of know-how?
Absolutely. It's a way of life back there. They had their own gardens. They preserved their own meats. They made their own sausages, made their own cheese, even made their own salt. And
Wow.
I'll tell you that story later.
Okay. So when your father came to, first of all, he met your mother, and by the way, this is Alfredo Pisciotta we're talking about, and your mother was Anna, is that right?
Yes, and her last name was Vididi, which in Latin means to see.
They met
in Italy. They grew up
Italy.
together.
Okay.
She went back to Italy when she was 5. They lived very close to one another in the village, just like half a block away from each other. So they grew up together.
And how old were they when they decided to move to?
They came here in 1933. So my father was probably 22. My mother was 20, something like, let's see, 19.
And they chose San Francisco rather than New York or other places where there's lots of Italians?
Right. They chose San Francisco because my father's brother was living here. He had a brother that was living here in North Beach on Telegraph Hill, and that's why they came here.
And did they come to initially to this house, or did they stop? Was there somewhere they lived before coming here?
Yes, they lived up on Green Street, up on the hill, just down the street from. I can't remember the address, but it's between Montgomery, just below Montgomery on Green Street, is where they lived when they first came here. And I think they lived there until they bought this house in 1939. In the middle of the Depression, they bought this house for $5,000. But my father had to get a loan to get it.
What at that time? What was your father doing?
Oh, in Italy, my father was a tailor. And so when he came here, my uncle was also a tailor working here. So he worked with them. But my father had a story about when he initially, when he just had gotten here, I guess he had a janitorial job somewhere around Market Street. And it was at night. He would go in there and do the clean up the shop or whatever it was where he was a janitor. And he would walk home early in the morning. He would come through the Broadway tunnel. Not the Broadway tunnel, Stockton Street tunnel. Of course, he didn't speak any English. And these two men accosted him. And he didn't know what they were saying to him because he didn't understand what they were saying. And so eventually he realized they wanted his money. We didn't have anything. Get him what he had, which was very, very little. And they went on their way. So when my father got home that morning, he said to his brother, "What does kill him mean?" So one of these robbers, said to the other, "Shall we kill him?" And the other one said, "No,
It's a good thing he gave us some money.
So that was my father's story. He remembered that word, "kill him," whatever that meant.
The Stockton Tunnel has always been a dodgy place. And so when they came here ultimately, in 1939, and bought this home in on where we are right now, 2048 Stockton. Were there a lot of other people from the Calabrese people?
Down here, no. Most of them were up on the hill. This was really very industrial. This was the end of the residential area. It was all industrial.
And going from here, by the way, just for listeners, this is on the corner of Stockton and Francisco. So Francisco north to the bay, would it have all been industrial?
Yes. Waterfront, trains. There was the belt line that came right up half a block from the house, which I remember, and it came up Francisco Street as well. There was the Simmons factory. There was also on the corner of Bay and Francisco, or Bay and Stockton, was a company that produced oxygen and carbon dioxide, big tanks. They were like probably about the big 6 foot high. And that's one of the sounds I remember growing up, with the clanging of the as they were moving these tanks at night, they would sound like bells clanging at night.
I'd love to, if you would just continue in that vein and tell me some of the other things that you remember as a child growing up in North Beach, other sounds and smells and things like that.
Okay, sure. Of course, I just mentioned the clanging of the big canisters, which were like bells. And, of course, the sound of the foghorns.
Which fortunately we still have.
Yes, but not all of them. The one that was closest to us is the one that was at Aquatic Park. And now you don't hear them as much as I remember them.
You mean they were much louder?
Yes, because they were closer, or there was one that was closer to us. And then the smell of North Beach. As we walked to school in the morning, the cool morning in the fog, you would get this whiff of fermenting wine coming out of the cellars, because everybody was making wine.
Was that at a certain time of year in the fall?
Of course, it was in the fall, yeah, after the harvest. But everybody made wine, and there was this wonderful, sweet, fermented smell, and it was always a cool smell coming from these, from the garages and the downstairs.
What would the men who, I assume it was the men who were making the wine, did they go and choose their grapes somewhere?
Yes. Yeah, because obviously we couldn't grow anything here. Yes, they went to the vineyards up in Sonoma County and purchased truckloads, big boxes of grapes.
And how would they bring those here?
Well, we went up and got them. They weren't delivered to us. We were poor. We went up and, with a few friends with cars and, brought the grapes back and crushed them in the basement here. I have my father's crusher and press in the backyard now.
We'll take a look at those later, I hope.
Yeah.
How did your father, had he learned winemaking from the old country?
Of course. Well, I think I mentioned that his mother had a little bodega, a little shop where she sold wine. And my father talks about when he was a little boy, he would have to go to the next village with the donkey to get grapes or to bring wine. So the next village, this was a very mountainous area, so he would bring the grapes or the wine or whatever he was delivering to the next village. And he would do that as a young man or a young boy for his mother's shop.
There was a malt factory,
Oh,
isn't
yes.
it, right?
Well, yeah, you could still see it from the window here. The silos are still there. I could see the silos right now. The malt factory was just 1/2 block away. And the Beltway, I think it's called, the trains, they were smaller. the trains would actually come up to the malt factory, which is a half a block away, up Francisco Street, and they would also come up Stockton Street, because there was also the main malt factory was on Francisco, but there was a subsidiary of it here a half a block away on Stockton. The trains would come up, and the malt would be, they would have big shafts, and the malt would go down into these shafts, and it would create a musty aroma in the air.
Did you like that smell?
Yeah, you could smell it, and it's just this warm, musty smell from the malt.
Was that malt used to make beer?
There, I was just looking at some of the historical sites, and there was a brewery down on Mason in Francisco. Oh, but that was in the 1800s. Maybe that's when it all started. I don't know.
What year was it then or approximately when was it that belt line or the trains stopped coming?
I don't remember. I can't tell you, but it stopped coming when I was quite young. Probably I'd say about 1950.
After the war and
after the war,
the rise of the automobile, I suppose.
Yes, after the war, I don't remember the trains coming up, but the tracks were there for a long time. So it was after the war, in the 1950s.
And can you tell me more about the garden? I'd say it was a famous garden in the neighborhood. I've heard a lot about it.
Oh.
The Pisciotta Garden. So as I understand it, the address where we are right now is 2048. And what was the address of the lot that was
2060?
2060. And at that time, when you were very young, it was just an empty lot, right?
Yeah, the whole length of it. And it's a 70-foot, 50 by 70-foot big lot. And we had rabbits, chickens, ducks, and a nice big organic garden and a peach tree. It's the only fruit tree we had, was this peach tree.
Did you get sweet peaches?
Mm-hmm.
Were the peaches sweet?
Oh, they were. And to this day, my favorite fruit is peaches.
That's given the climate in San Francisco, but I guess North Beach is a nice climate. So
Yeah. I have 2 fig trees in the back that my father planted. But he didn't have those there when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s. He probably planted them in the 60s. They're quite large now.
So what percentage of the food that your family ate was grown in the garden?
Oh, well, probably most of the meat, whether it's rabbit or chicken or dog. So I'd say probably 80% of the protein was probably from the garden. Now, being in San Francisco, we are limited on what we could grow because of the climate. I mean, we couldn't grow corn or anything. Not that Italians grow corn that I know of. But green vegetables, and beans. Tomatoes, not that well, but later on my parents bought a house in Marin, and that's where we could grow our tomatoes.
And what was your role in terms of the garden? Did you have chores that you were doing?
I was the only girl, and there were 3 boys, but I was the only one that really got involved with any of that. I actually used to help my father slaughter the animals, which most people think, oh my God, how could you do that as a kid? Well, yeah, you just did. So that's what I remember about mostly is helping my dad.
Was your dad the one who did most of the work in the garden, or was your mom also?
No, I think they did it together. Mm-hmm. And the same with raising the animals. We did at one point have a lamb that we brought eventually to Marin County. We only had the lamb here for a short time.
What is your order in terms of birth order?
I'm the second oldest. My oldest brother has passed away.
And you have 2 other brothers?
Yeah, and the brother after me, there's only 2 of us left. Brother, the 3rd child after me recently passed away, and then I have my baby brother, who actually lives in Marin in the house that was our country home.
Did all of you stay in the Bay Area or Northern California?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like a close family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's continue a little bit more on your father after working as a tailor, and you said he had some janitorial work when he came. I think he worked in the naval shipyard, didn't he?
Yes. Don't forget, this is World War II, and he, by that time, he had become a citizen, and he was he had a family, so they didn't draft him. So he worked during the war at the naval shipyards, and he worked on submarines. He was a little man, so he could crawl into these. He did the pipe fitting for the submarines. And what was interesting about that is that when the submarines were completed before they would have a maiden run, and I can remember my father said that they had all the people that had, or the men that had, or at least some of the men that had worked on the ship, go on the run. And, it was like a test.
Guinea pigs.
If it failed, it was their fault, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, my father did do that. He went on a maiden run on one of these submarines during the war.
Just for the record, I should say that this Telegraph Hill Dwellers Oral History Project did an interview with your father, and you and your mother were also present, and that was done in 1996. And so some of these stories were told, but I think you're telling them in a more clear way in some ways. And I do remember that one funny thing from him talking about his work on the submarines is that he was given this kind of a proclamation or something from the Navy, which was pretty funny.
It was very elaborate, and Did you get a picture of it?
No, but we'll get a picture of that later.
I can't find it. I think maybe my brother might have it. I can't find it. But it always hung in the hallway here, framed. I mean, it was like my father was very proud of it. But it was kind of done in a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, because it said, Alfred Pisciotta went to Davy
Jones' locker.
Right. Yes, exactly. I think during that interview, she read. Didn't she?
There was, I believe it was read into the interview, so we can find the language there.
Yeah.
So around what year was it that your family was it a kind of a second home or a summer home in Marin County?
Yeah, in the San Geronimo Valley on the way, past Fairfax on the way to
in Woodacre, right?
In Woodacre. At that time, most of the Italian families had summer homes in Marin. When we'd get out of school in June, we'd spend the next 3 months at our summer home. That's what everyone did. Just
to get away from the fog.
Yeah, because it was foggy and cold, but it was always warm and pleasant in Marin. But that was not unusual. I think you asked me about the neighborhood, if there were any Calabreses in the neighborhood. Not here, but these were all Sicilian fishermen. Oh, and to this day, I can look at every one of those houses down Francisco Street and tell you what Sicilian family name was in that house.
Are some of them the families still around?
There's a few of us that are still around. There is one family, Ballester, is still on a house up here. Yes, and another family, I think the great-granddaughter lives in it, I don't know, but the Sabellas were across the street, the Lattoris were across the street, Biancas, they were all fishermen.
And did you, I don't know, did the people from different parts of Italy who lived in North Beach, did they all get along pretty well?
Yes, primarily because of the church. That brought the Italians together. I mean, this is the Italian church, right? It wasn't just the Sicilian church. It wasn't just for the Calabreses. It was for the Italians. So that community brought everybody together. The language, of course, was different because Sicilians had a very, they had their own dialect. We had our dialect. We could understand each other, but there was clearly, and then the Northern Italians, of course, spoke the pure Italian. They didn't have the dialect.
Did the people from some of the Northern European places, Northern Italian places look down?
Yes, of course. It's the Southern Italians, for sure. There was no question about that. I wasn't aware of that, but I knew it existed. I wasn't aware of it as a child, but in retrospect, and then I eventually learned, yes, the North looks down on the South, without a doubt. And most of the families in this particular area were, I know I can't say most of them were Southern Italian. It was pretty much a mix of all regions in Italy.
Did you find many non-Italians living in North Beach at that time?
My mother's best friend was a Greek woman, and no, there were not many non-Italians, at least not in our community. I mean, it was a pretty close community with the church and the activities and the school. All of us kids went to the school here. Some of the kids did go to public schools, but most of the Italian kids went to St. Peter and Paul's.
And did you go to the school that's affiliated with St. Peter and Paul?
Yes. All my brothers and all of us went to St. Peter's and Paul's and graduated from there.
And were you part of the Salesian boys and girls
Well,
groups?
there wasn't. When I was young, it was not the Salesian boys and girls.
It was only boys.
It was only boys. And it was only girls. There was a Salesian Girls Club and there was a Salesian Boys Club. It wasn't until much later that it became the Boys and Girls Club. Now that we're on that subject, the school originally was a boys' school. I assume you know that. Yeah, it was originally a boys' school, and those of us that went to Catholic school went to Presentation Grammar School, which was up on Mason and I can't remember the cross street.
Was it Broadway? On the
the
other side of
Bug
what's
Road.
now the tunnel?
Yes. As a matter of fact, when I was in the second grade, they had to close down the school because the Broadway tunnel was being built, and we were just right above. We were one block. What is the one block after that? Is that Pacific? I don't know.
Broadway Pacific.
Yeah, so I think it was right on the corner of Mason and Pacific. And so they closed down the girls' school because of the construction of the Broadway tunnel. So we came down here to the St. Peter and Paul's, and that's when it became boys and girls. It became co-ed.
And ever since then,
it's been
It
co-ed.
never went back to the girls going up to...
No, they never reopened that school. Yeah. But the high school I went to was run by the same nuns. Presentation.
You went to Presentation High School?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but and I can't remember when. Well, if I was in the second grade, do you know when
The tunnel was
tunnel
built?
was built?
I don't. We can look that up.
Yeah.
Where is Presentation High School? Or was it?
It was over on Turk and Masonic. Do you know where Lone Mountain is? Up on the hill? Well, right below it was the girls' school, high school. It is now part of USF.
So it was run by the...
Presentation nuns.
But the... isn't USF, it's a...
Jesuit.
So are the nuns there affiliated with the Jesuits at all?
No. At that time, there was Presentation High School. There was St. Ignatius High School that was run by the Jesuits. Presentation was run by the nuns, the Presentation nuns. And Holy Names, is it Holy Names was up on the hill? I don't know. Anyway, it was a private college for women. I can't remember the name of it. You know? It's now part of USF.
It was Lone Mountain.
Lone Mountain, that's right. Holy Name's on the other side. Yeah, Lone Mountain. Yeah. So there was St. Ignatius, Lone Mountain, and Presentation were all in the same area, off Masonic. And there's a beautiful building right on, that was the nuns' convent, which is now a college or something, right on the corner of Turk and Masonic. Beautiful structure.
I know that building.
Yeah, we had beautiful gardens between the nuns' house and the school. Were beautiful gardens for us students.
We've talked some about your childhood, but as you moved through and became an adolescent and in high school and so forth, what are some of the memories or activities that you were active with?
We used to, well, one of the things we used to go to beach parties at the Montera Beach over Devil's Slide before it had the tunnel. Mm-hmm. That was one of my memories. Another memory, we would go down to Laguna Seca to see the races. We traveled down, and this is when I'm, junior and senior in high school.
Were there things in the
things that
neighborhood?
we did no, because I didn't hang out with the boys in the neighborhood. I wasn't interested in the Italian boys. I was interested in the Irish boys from from Noe Valley that went to Reardon.
What was the attraction of the Irish boys versus the Italian boys?
Well,
Something different?
Something different. So that's how I got in. Because I don't think the Italian boys were interested in going to, Montera beach parties or the Laguna Seca races. The North Beach boys stayed in North Beach.
A little bit later in our conversation, we'll get around to talking about art and artistic communities. But when you were growing up, did you begin to develop interest in art? I mean, did you get some of that from your family?
No, the only thing I was interested or I got involved in, I was part of the choir at the church, so I learned the Gregorian chants, and I loved singing. Not that I was ever an accomplished singer, but I could participate in groups, choral. That's probably the only artistic thing I did growing up. It wasn't until later on in life that I got.
Were you still in the neighborhood in the 50s, though, when you began to see more of the beats coming in? And
yes, and I can remember. We were just high school kids, right? So we'd don our black stockings and our black turtlenecks, try to look like, and we'd walk by the bagel shop. We didn't dare go in. But I remember walking by the bagel shop and the Brighton Express. We could go into the Brighton Express. I don't know if you have heard about it.
I don't know the Brighton Express.
It was on Jackson Street, and it was very much like a New York bar. It was all brick, and it was a coffee shop. It was like one of the first coffee shops called the Brightness, and that's where we would go pretending we were beatniks.
If your parents had known, I mean, were I'm guessing that the Italians in the neighborhood were maybe a little more conservative and didn't appreciate some of these things.
My parents were not like that. If anything, my father was probably he accepted anybody. I mean, he was a very loving man, very very generous man. So, and they had many friends of different ethnic groups, So no, my parents never.
I guess we should go back to your father a little bit, because I guess he continued working at the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard into the 50s sometime, but then he opened his own business, his upholstery business.
Well, before he went, I don't know if I skipped a little segment there. He worked for Diani, a company called an Italian from Calabrese, who was my godfather, had a very successful upholstery shop in San Francisco, and my father worked for him, and that's where he learned the trade. And that was when that was probably my father probably started working for him, because I have some documentation, some papers, in the late 30s, through the 40s, until he went to the naval shipyards. He worked as a poster and that's where he learned the trade.
And then after finishing with the shipyard, he went back to that.
And yeah, built this house and included a little shop downstairs. But even before that, when we were still living here, and he was working for the Diani company doing upholstery, and he was having like 2 jobs. He was working at the naval shipyard, and he would do upholstery in the basement here. So he basically had 2 jobs.
Did your mother ever do anything outside the house?
Oh yeah. When she first, I have some wonderful pictures of my mother. She worked, when she first got here, she worked at the Bemis Bag Factory, which was down here on the waterfront. Are you familiar with it?
I don't know it.
It was a company that made cotton bags for wheat, you know, the big bags for grain. And the women sewed these bags. They were all made out of cotton. Beautiful, colorful cotton. I actually have a piece of that fabric here that my mother made into an apron that I still have.
That's right.
Yeah, so she worked when she first got here. She didn't have any children. Well, that's another story. When my parents were in Italy, they got married, and in, let's see, when did they get married? 30. In 1930 they got married. They were in Italy, and she got pregnant. And they had always planned on coming to America because she was a citizen. Well, if she was pregnant, she found out that if she had that child in Italy, she would have to leave the child there. She could come to America with her husband, but she couldn't bring the child. She'd have to bring the child later, or call for the child later, because they found that child is an Italian citizen and would have to go through that. So she's 7 months pregnant, and they made a sudden decision to come to America because they didn't want to leave that child there. So they come here, and she actually had a stillborn. So she never...
As I recall, they had a very harrowing trip over.
Yes.
A long ship ride.
Long ship ride coming from Italy, stopping in North Africa, and my father and mother describing the women with their faces covered, you know, which was a real... I mean, they were from this little village and seeing all this exotic stuff in North Africa when the ships stopped there. But anyway, she lost that child. So when she was, you know, she didn't have any children for several years. So she did work as soon as she got here, and she worked at the Bemis Bag Factory.
You mentioned earlier the Simmons factory. What did they make?
Mattresses.
Oh, that's the Simmons mattresses.
Yes.
I see.
Simmons mattresses. And I guess it burned down in the 60s, and that's when they moved, I think, to the East Bay, and they built Akron and that whole development and the apartments.
So, do you have any memories as a young person in North Beach of holidays? I've heard a lot of people talk about the St. Joseph days and things.
Oh, I'll tell you about the St. Joseph. What's interesting about St. Joseph is that the Sicilian women had a devotion to St. Joseph. The Calabrese didn't, but a lot of my mother's friends were Sicilian, and they would have a special, a gathering of women, only women, no men. And I remember going with my mom, and it was all women. They'd have all these candles, and they would sing, and it was in reference to St. Joseph. That's the only thing I know about St. Joseph, and the only connection I have St. Joseph is through the Sicilian women. Another thing I wanted to mention about my recollection growing up in North Beach is this: all of the Sicilian women whose husbands were fishermen had radios, transmitters, and they would constantly have it on. What is it called? Shortwave. They would dial into the shortwave. All their husbands were out there fishing, and that's how the fishermen would communicate with one another through shortwave. And the women at home could hear them. And so when you would go into a Sicilian home, there was always the crackling of the sound of the shortwave radio. It was always on because the women were always listening for their husbands on there.
That's a great detail.
So there's an audio memory that I have of the crackling of the shortwave radios.
Was the church an important part of your family's life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even
Did
the
you go every Sunday to Mass?
Of course. Of course. Everybody did. It's like, why wouldn't you?
And that was the great unifier, as you said, of the neighborhood.
Exactly. It was. And, all the celebrations and the Columbus Day celebrations and things like that. My parents always had, whenever there was any kind of an occasion at the church or church picnic or community picnic, my parents would have the salami booth. They would have the wheel, and you'd spin the wheel, put the quarter on the number. And they did that for years. That was their thing.
Did people like, your family as an example, or the neighborhood in a more general sense, have connections to San Francisco outside of North Beach, participating in more citywide things as well?
A very close friend of the family's was the O'Haras. Now, I don't know how much you know about San Francisco history, but there was a columnist called the Question Man. Do you know the Question Man?
I do remember the Question Man.
Okay. Well, she was a very dear friend of my parents. And Novella. Did you know Novella?
No, but I understand that she used to stay at, or used to go to the New Pisa restaurant and question the customers.
Yeah, and anybody on the street. It was called the Question Man, but it was not a main.
That was a long-running feature in the Chronicle, I believe.
Yes, yes. And they were Irish. Her husband was Kenneth, and her son, grew up with one of my brothers. And whenever we would have a family dinner or Christmas or one of the celebrations, we'd always have it we'd clear out the shop. It's a big space. And we'd put this long table. And we'd have about 30 people and have Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving. And there was always at least 30 people. And they weren't only just family. The Novella was always there, the O'Haras, and other families. So that's one area that my parents didn't just stay in.
Language would have been a bit of a barrier, though, right? Because your father, I think he'd learned English over the years, but it was always, let's just say Italian was always his first language.
Yeah, of course, even for my mother, even though she was born here, it was. But being raised in my family, I can understand Italian perfectly well. I can understand it because I heard it in the neighborhood. I heard my parents speaking to one another, speaking to the families, but they never spoke to us in Italian. So I can understand it, but I can't not speak it fluently. I can speak it, but not fluently, because my parents didn't want Italian to be our primary language. So English was our primary.
There was never any thought then that the family might return to Italy someday or something like that.
This is World War II. Italians were not thought of too highly during World War II. I don't know if you know the history of the Italian
certainly.
internment, right? You know about. Okay, so I don't need to explain that to you. So there was that element. We're in America. You speak English. You speak American.
Was there? I mean,
so
of
they
course.
spoke perfect English by the time I came along. I mean, they'd been married for many years before we came along. They were childless for quite a while.
Did I heard somebody say once that you could tell what day of the week it was almost because you could smell everybody cooking the same things on the same days. And
All right, that's true. Did you? Well, it's the pasta sauce on Sundays, and I'll tell you a story about that one. I was taking an Italian class at the Italian athletic club, and the woman that was teaching it was she was a teacher, very intelligent, very bright woman. And after class one day, she said, "Rita, I kind of don't understand why you don't speak better Italian. I mean, you grew up here in North Beach. Your parents were Italians." And I said, "Well, we didn't. My parents didn't want us to be primarily Italian speaking." She said, "Well, her father was a lawyer. Okay, they lived in the marina." And so she told me her story. She said they were so paranoid that whenever they would be on Sunday, when they're cooking the pasta and the sugo for the pasta, they would close the windows so the neighbor, this is the marina, it wasn't North Beach, so the neighbors would not know they were Italian. She told me that. And I think her father may have been interned or may have been arrested or questioned or something like that. I don't remember the full details of it, but they were very paranoid. We were not. Because they didn't come after, people like my parents. They went after the radio announcers. They went after lawyers. Those were the people, the intelligentsia is who they went after, or who they watched.
I'd heard from somebody else I interviewed that there was, and this might have been before World War II actually broke out, but large gatherings of people listening to Mussolini's addresses in parts of North Beach, and I'm sure that attracted the attention of the authorities. So you went on to college immediately after finishing high school?
Yes. After high school, I went on to nursing school in the East Bay, Providence College of Nursing, and which was affiliated with Holy Names College up on the hill, which was a women's college, Catholic women's college. And after that, I started working at San Francisco General. I worked there.
Right away. You got a job right out of college.
Which was never a problem getting a job.
And did you specialize in a certain kind of nursing?
Well, I started off not because I chose to, but I just kind of fell into it, into the neurosurgical unit ICU, which is pretty heavy duty. Most of our patients were old guys that fell down and had their too many drinks and got subdurals. And it was a general, so we got a lot of that. We also got, head wounds, stabs in the head, stuff like that.
Rita, let's, if you don't mind, take a short break. This is John Doxey from the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Oral History Project, and I'm sitting with Rita Pisciotta. This is our second session together, and today is Monday, August 15th, 2022. And we're sitting in Rita's delightful back garden, which I think we'll talk about. But Rita, I wanted to pick up on a couple of things from our last session that more details about what it was like to grow up living in North Beach, and more of the kind of visceral things, the sights and smells. And you had mentioned a few things that you had wanted to include but hadn't. So maybe you could tell me some of those.
I think last time I talked about the shortwave radios and so I won't mention that. But and I think I also spoke about the sounds of the
foghorns.
The foghorns and the clanging of the big oxygen tanks.
Right, you
I
did.
talked about that. The other real strong memory is of the fishermen, because this section of San Francisco, or of North Beach, was primarily Sicilian fishermen. We were not Sicilians, we were Calabreses. We were probably the only Calabreses here. The rest of them all along Francisco Street were all fishermen. And one of my earliest memories is Mr. Bianca, who lived across the street. He was an elderly gentleman, old fisherman, and he'd sit out in a nice little wooden chair in front of his house mending his nets. And he would spread the nets all the way down the street, and he would be mending them.
These were very large nets, right?
Yes, they were huge. I mean, they were spread like halfway up the block, and he would be mending them by hand.
What were the fish that they primarily used these nets to catch? Do you know?
I don't know, but I do remember them. They would occasionally accidentally catch an octopus in their nets, and so we always got octopus, which was one of my favorite foods. But probably mostly sardines. It depends what was running at the time. But they were big, huge, long nets that they would use at the time, which I think are not environmentally the thing to do right now.
So much of this area between where we are now on the corner of Francisco and Stockton, from basically northward toward the bay from Francisco, was Sicilian fishermen in those days. Is that?
Just Francisco Street, because after that there were no private homes. It was all industrial.
All industrial.
So the Francisco Street was really the
boundary.
The boundary. Nobody was living beyond us, beyond Francisco Street. It was all industrial.
Did you know anybody from the DiMaggio family?
I didn't personally. No, I did not. Joe DiMaggio was, of course, older than me.
And had gone off to the Yankees.
Yes.
By the time you were.
So no, I did not know them. My family didn't know them.
But a lot of other great ball players, I think, came through that community.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But as a young girl, I was not interested in any of that kind of thing.
What about, you had mentioned
that
growing up there was just the foundations or ruins left?
Oh, yes. Right on just half a block up Stockton Street on the corner of Pfeiffer and Stockton was a concrete foundation. It was an empty lot with all these huge, big concrete foundations. As a child, I didn't know what that was, but that's where we played. It was a big, empty lot. Come to find out, that was the Tolan Medical School, which was the first, eventually it became part of University of San Francisco UC Medical Center, but it was the first educational medical center.
Dating from, I believe, the 1880s or
yes,
something like that.
Yes, I think it started 1850s. And it wasn't here very long, but it was definitely the precursor to the medical school up on Parnassus. Eventually, in the later, I think maybe late 1850s, they moved up to Parnassus. But it started right here. And so there were still the remains of those foundations when we were kids.
Presumably,
in the 40s.
Presumably, maybe it was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake.
Probably, it probably was.
Because this area was heavily damaged.
Absolutely. This house was built shortly after the earthquake, 2 years after the earthquake, in 1908. Yeah.
Were there other smells?
Yes, there was a bakery down at the corner, Venetian Bakery. And in the morning you would have this wonderful aroma of baking French bread. It was Venetian Bakery on Powell and Francisco Streets, just down the street.
The Venetians made their presence felt then.
Yes, but they didn't live here. It was primarily Sicilians in this part of North Beach. And then, of course, I remember the peddler would come around. He would park his truck on Francisco Street and honk his horn, and all the housewives, all the ladies would run out there and buy their vegetables from him. The vegetables that we couldn't grow in our garden here. My parents had a garden, and he would come regularly and.
Grown somewhere else in the Bay Area where
Yes,
it was warmer.
definitely not grown. Yeah, probably. And I'm talking about the 1940s. So there were big agriculture farms, just like near South City. And that was all agriculture. All those hills
All
in the
of
valley.
what's now Silicon Valley was.
Yeah, that area for sure. Yes, orchards and yeah, very different at that time.
You showed me also a clip from, I think it was the San Francisco Examiner, that your mother was on the front page. What can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes. Actually, it was my mother saved a little boy from a burning house right next door. So happens that the little boy's mother and my mother were very close friends, and they were always, my mother would be out on her porch and this woman would be down there, and they'd be talking. And while they were talking, Mary Vella, who was a fisherman's wife, became hysterical. It turns out that she'd had some clothing near a heater in the hallway, and it immediately burst out in flames, and she was absolutely hysterical and called 911, or not 911, she called the fire department. My mother ran over and ran through the flames because the little boy, who was I think 3 at the time, was in the back bedroom, so she had to go through the flames to get to him. She got minor burns, but she was able to get the little boy out, and the house was totally destroyed. It was a little cabin. It was quite beautiful. It was built in the late 1800s, and it was an all wooden cabin, and had a beautiful little porch in the front and a beautiful garden in the front, and it burned. Yeah. But yeah, that my mother was a little heroine at the time.
That's a nice story. Very heroic.
Yeah.
But the fire was contained. It didn't damage your home?
No, because that house was toward the back of the lot. Our house was toward the front. So it didn't, they were not adjacent at all. They were like, so it didn't affect our house at all. But it totally destroyed that little house.
This garden that we're sitting in is close to it's very close to the garden that you had when it was that you described previously, that was much larger before the home was built on it. And so many of the fig trees and things were planted by your father, probably.
The fig trees, we've got 2 large fig trees. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, here in San Francisco, we have lots of figs on the trees, but it's never hot enough for them to really ripen. But they're quite beautiful, and they're quite old, these trees. We had a huge garden just next door before that house was built. Yeah.
And we'll take a look at it later, but the crusher that your father used to make wine is...
It's right here in the garden.
Sitting over here. I don't know if this... Well, if I move the camera around, will it capture this?
This is the crusher, and it would crush the grapes, and after they were crushed, we would put them, or my dad would put them in the press, the wine press. It's behind that plant. I don't think you could see it, but so these are pieces, old pieces that are left from what my father's winemaking days.
And did he make wine until the time he passed away? I mean, was he continuing?
We continued to do it as he got older. We did it at our place in Marin County. We had a place in Woodacre, and by that time my father and mom were elderly, so the whole family got together and we did make some wine in Woodacre. But that was probably, let's see, that was like 40, my son was probably 1 or 2. No, by that time he was 6. So it was about 40 years ago, the last time we made wine. And that was not here in the city, but in Marin County. Yeah.
And was it mostly red wine that he made, or?
No, it would always be white grapes that he would buy up in Napa or Sonoma. Sometimes we'd go up and we'd pick the grapes ourselves, which was always fun. We'd go up there, the whole family would go up there, and we would go into the orchards, and because the vineyards would take the first, they would go in there and take all the grapes, but there was always a lot of grapes left. So we would go up there after they've harvested their grapes, and then we would get what was left and use that for our wine.
So thank you for these nice descriptions of what it was like to be here when you were younger,
Yeah,
in the
very
40s and 50s. And then what year was it that you finished high school?
I graduated from high school in 1960. 60.
60, 60.
Yes.
And as you said earlier, you went to Providence College?
Providence College of Nursing, which was in Oakland, affiliated with Holy Names College, which was a women's college up on the hill. So that's where I became a nurse. And after graduation, I worked at San Francisco General. And that was like from 63, I started at General. And it was shortly after I started there that we nurses actually had the first strike. I mean, nurses didn't strike
And
in the 60s.
What was the impetus for the strike?
It was pay, and of course, we were city employees because we were working for the county. So we actually went on strike, which was unprecedented at the time. And, I don't even remember specifically, but I think it was staffing and pay.
Isn't it interesting that continues to be an issue?
Yes.
Today's, I think it was just today that the Kaiser mental health people went on strike.
That's right.
Over staffing issues.
Exactly. But that was unheard of at the time. Nurses would never do something like that. When I trained as a nurse, we were told that if you're sitting there charting and a doctor walks in the room, we nurses stand up and give that doctor our seats. That's the way we were trained. Well, it's not like that today.
And you began to say how long you were working at General.
I worked at General for about 10 years. Then I moved to Italy, lived in Italy for a couple of years. My husband at the time was on the GI Bill. And so he was studying art and literature in Perugia. So we were in Perugia, Italy for a while, and then in my family's small village in Calabria. I lived there for a while, and then came back.
When you were there, did you work at all?
No, I did not, no.
Did you, can you tell me how many children you have?
I have one son.
One son.
Mm-hmm.
And his name?
Danielle.
Danielle.
And I have two grandchildren.
And did he, was he born when you were in Italy? Or?
No. I remarried. My son is, I had my son with my second husband.
With Blaine?
Yes.
And what is Blaine's last name?
Ellis.
Blaine Ellis.
Yes.
Who's a very nice guy and a very accomplished photographer.
I think so.
What was it that drew you to nursing?
I remember very clearly what drew me to nursing. In high school, in my senior year, I took an anatomy and physiology class, and the nun was just she was a wonderful teacher, and she got me hooked on anatomy and physiology, and that's when I decided I wanted to go into nursing. Of course, we're talking about the late 1950s when I'm in high school. Do you know what kind of choices we had as young women after we graduated from high school? You became a teacher, a nurse, a housewife, or a nun.
Or a secretary.
Oh yeah, or a secretary. Those were the only choices we had. It's much different today. Young women have a lot of choices to do other things, but those were our choices. I chose nursing.
A noble profession. And when you came back from Italy, did you resume working as a nurse?
Of course, yes. And then I was living in Mill Valley, and I worked. I started working for California Pacific up on Buchanan, and I worked there for many years. I finally retired 8 years ago from California Pacific.
And you described yourself earlier as critical care nurse. Is that like the ICU
It's
nurse?
ICU, critical care nurse, yeah.
And is that what you specialized in that?
I did over 50 years of ICU nursing. Toward the end, I was, after I had a child, I didn't do it full time. I was only doing it part time, which made it possible. But I stayed with the intensive care unit for 50 years.
You must have found that work to be quite
Rewarding.
satisfying, rewarding.
Very satisfying, very challenging, very rewarding. I love dealing with not only the patients but the families, and as medicine changed, nurses became more essential in the care and of patients. Initially, when I first got out of school, it was the doctors that made all the decisions, and all the input was strictly from the doctors. Eventually, nurses became a very integral part of the decision in planning care for these patients. The doctors listened to us. We were with the patients, 8 to 12 hours a day. The doctors weren't there. We knew these patients, so they listened to us, and our input became very, very important. And that's changed a lot. That's the way it is today now. And nurses are a strong, integral part of decision-making in patient care.
Since you were there so long, and you must have really risen in seniority, did you become kind of a manager?
I didn't want to do that. I mean, I was, charge nurse from time to time. No, because my priority was my family. I didn't want to get involved any more than that. So, I would be a charge nurse from time to time, but I didn't want to get into management. It was not something that I aspired to.
And was it a career that, as you just said, family was your top priority, so it gave you enough flexibility to...
Yes, and as I said, I would only work, I didn't work full time, I didn't work 5 days a week, I worked 3 days a week. So that gave me time for my work and time for being a mother and having a family.
And what year was it? You said that you began your CPAMC work when you were still in Mill Valley, right?
When I got back from Italy, which would have been 1971, 72.
What year was it that you transitioned back from Marin County to San Francisco?
No, I went from Marin County, Mill Valley. Then I moved. We bought a house in Guerneville, and that's where my son was born. And we were there for 10 years. And then when one of the apartments here in the city became available, my husband said, "Time for us to go back to the city." And that was 1984. I returned to the city. So I basically left San Francisco and the home 1969 and came back in 1984.
Had you been, perhaps, at least in the back of your mind, looking for an opportunity to get back into particularly this neighborhood, North Beach?
Absolutely. I mean,
And the timing was right.
Yeah, the timing was right. And one of the apartments came available. I said, "We're moving." So we came back. Yeah.
And did you buy a unit, or are you renting?
My parents
Oh, it was from your parents were still alive. I see.
Yes,
Oh,
my
okay.
parents were still alive, and we came and lived in the flat that I'm in now. So I've been in this flat since 1984.
And did any of your siblings cohabitate here? They had all left, and
Yeah.
And now you and Blaine are the owners of this building.
Well,
is that correct? Or?
It was left to me and my brothers, and our descendants.
But there's 2 units in your home, so is the other unit rented to?
Oh, my niece is there now.
Your niece is there.
Yeah, that's right. You just asked me. My niece is living there now, but they just bought a house in Moran, so they're leaving. Yeah, so I'll be the only family member. The rest of the units are being rented. Will be.
Are both of the buildings then, both of the addresses in your family?
Yes,
I see.
both buildings belong to the family, and they still do.
And did you maintain, after you returned to this neighborhood, the Guerneville home for some time, or did you let that go?
Well, no, we kept it.
You kept it.
We kept it, and eventually we bought a house in New Mexico, built a house there, because we thought that would be fun. Bought some bare land, and we literally built the house.
Would you like your sunglasses?
Yes, I think I should wear them. Yes. That's
So, very stylish. So do you still have the Guerneville home?
Nope, we sold that, and we bought another property in New Mexico.
And is that near Santa Fe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you spend several months a year there now, or?
Yeah, maybe 4 months a year.
Mm-hmm. What are some things that you have taken up as activities or hobbies, if you will, since going into retirement?
Well, I've always done a lot of craft. I have a big, large loom, so I've done a lot of weaving, and but about 10 years ago, just before I retired, I was in the ICU and I heard this lovely, lovely music, and I thought, where is that beautiful music coming from? And I turned around, and here's this young woman playing a harp for the patients, for my patient, and I thought, wow, that's really how wonderful. And I started asking her about what she was doing, and she was a therapeutic harpist coming to the hospital playing for the patients.
That's very nice.
And it turns out that she was also teaching therapeutic harp, and I thought, wow. So I decided I was going to learn the harp. So I play the harp now, not well, but I do play the harp. I've never played an instrument, so I had to learn everything about music, how to read music. The only experience I had with music was when I was in school, singing in the choir, learning the Gregorian chants. But that was my only experience with music, was vocals, chorals, but never really understanding music or music theory. So that I've taken up in the last year.
Do you think you'd like to do something therapeutic with
No.
it? Just
Well,
for your
yes,
own enjoyment?
It is therapeutic for me. But no, I am not comfortable enough to be playing for patients or someone else.
That's a great thing to be doing, though. What are some other things I think that I've noticed about you is that you have a very close circle of friends, people who live in the neighborhood.
Yes. Most of our friends are artists. Most of them are local. We've known them for years. So there's a little enclave of us that still remain. My husband worked at the spaghetti factory with several of the artists that are still living in the area. And that was back in the 60s when he lived at worked at the spaghetti factory. So yes, it's a very close community, and that's why I really love living here. I mean, we walk to the park every day and always bump into somebody, and it's really like a village. North Beach is like a village, and so it still maintains that sense of being a small community. You know people, and then we have this wonderful park. So, and when you think about the European villages, they always have a center and a church and the community around it, and that's very much like this. So I think of it as a village.
It strikes me that if you structure your life right, if you don't have a job that's in another county or something crazy like that, you can really just do everything within walking distance.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I only take my car if I have to leave the city to go see my grandson or my son, but otherwise I don't need it here in the city.
Where does your son live?
He lives in Marin County.
He does.
Yeah.
And he has a son.
He has a son and a daughter. So I have a granddaughter and a grandson. My grandson is 10. My granddaughter is 18. She's up at Humboldt College, just started her sophomore year.
As well.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had spent with your first husband some time in Italy, Perugia, while he was pursuing artistic studies, and then you had gone to Calabria. And is that a place that you continue to visit? Your ancestral home, you might say?
Yes, we have gone up, and because I still have aunts and uncles and mostly cousins that are still there. Actually, I only have one uncle that's still there.
Do they ever come and visit you here?
Yes. One of my cousins, a couple of my cousins have come here because I have family in Australia too. I think I mentioned that earlier, that a lot of Italians went to Australia because they couldn't come here in the 50s. So yeah, I had cousins that are from Australia that have come visit, and those from Italy as well. And my uncle came too. Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I think we've pretty much covered everything. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time.
This has been fun. And thank you.
Okay.